What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video and back with another tournament report video because we've got some exciting results to share from the DM era of the game's history. Some exciting tournaments wrapped up relatively recently. I mean, I know it's December now and this wrapped up in like November, I think. But, I've been a bit busy, so I haven't had a chance to get around to it. But I do think that waiting has actually given me sort of a thematic through line to connect the events that I want to talk about today. And that is Burn. Burn doing well in some of these past formats. So, we'll start with Yata format and then head on over to the Warrior format, which, I think a lot of people might be disheartened by these results, especially the Warrior format result. But I'm here to hopefully give people a bit of peace of mind, go over what I think these results mean, and what I expect from the future of these formats, because these are two of my favorite DM era formats that we covered, and so I do have a vested interest in whether they are good or not. And I hope that they still remain good. There's always the chance for a format to go downhill. I mean, look at Reaper format. I don't necessarily think the format is as bad as a lot of people view it as nowadays, but it was viewed when people first started re-exploring it as sort of, a fun alternative to GOAT that, was a bit grindier and fair and stuff. It just didn't have the power 3 like Graves of Charity, Pot of Greed, Delinquent Duo, so people thought it would be a lot better. And instead they got Steino DKs, right? And Steino DKs is a very different style of gameplay that a lot of people did not enjoy. So a lot of people left Reaper format. So the question is that going to happen with Yata format and Warrior format, two formats that are looked at among people who explore some of the other DM era formats as some of the best in that time period. Some very balanced formats. Some formats that still give you the same retro feel that something like GOAT format does, but that are a bit more unexplored. So, you don't have to queue up against like Chaos Turbo potentially, or see that dominate all the tournaments. It seems like every tournament is won by a new deck in these formats, and these two tournaments are no exception there. So let's start with the Purple Bird Special number 1 held on the Fiber Jar Discord server, which will be linked in the description down below. This was a Yata format event. Yata format is the format based around Worlds format in 2003. So, very fun time, and it is sort of a golden age of the DM era, in my opinion. It's the perfect balance between the sort of classic pace of gameplay, while also, balancing the power cards actually pretty well. It's not too broken out there. And, you actually do get some really, really back and forth games, and skill is very, very much rewarded in this format. But if we look at the results here, 28 people played, and the winning deck was Germ Burn. Yes, you see that right. Germ Burn won the event. And it wasn't just that Germ Burn won the event. No. The top 2 decks in the event were Germ Burn. The winning deck list was from GMYFS here. And the second place deck list was from Prada. And I'm pretty sure that these are pretty much exactly the same. I could be wrong. Yeah, it looks like they're largely just the same except for the side deck. So seems like this list is pretty good. And, we have seen past results with decks, maybe not exactly like this, but similar to this, playing some burn cards like Nightmare Wheel and Giant Germs, in addition to some just more aggressive strategies, being able to win the whole thing. So the question is, does this mean that Germ Burn is the new undisputed deck? After all, only 2 people brought it to the event, according to the retro bot classification here. And those 2 people got first or second place. So that is a pretty good showing for the event. However, I will say it is always important to look at Burn results with a bit of a grain of salt when you're in a format that's a bit more underexplored. Burn is a very tricky deck to play against. That's one of the strengths of Burn. It forces your opponent to play in a different way than they normally do, and sometimes, given the configuration of their main deck and side deck, they might not have the tools to actually combat what you bring here. So I think that if you actually look at some of the other topping hand control lists, and you look in the side deck here, there isn't too much that can really stop Burn. I do think that Alpha 2's list here has, some of the most tools to stop Burn here. It's got Heavy Storm, Double Dust Tornado, and Double Knock there, all of which are very good against a Burn style strategy, playing Chain Energy. But I do think it could go even further. You could play another Dust Tornado, for instance. You could play Giant Trunades as well. There's a lot of different things that you can do to sort of punish the Germ Burn deck. I think it just wasn't on people's radar, especially because people play so many MSTs, and Chain Energy is weak to MST, of course. But the downside to that is that you still have to pay the 500 to get rid of the Chain Energy, and if your opponent sets it up turn 1, you still could be in a pretty bad spot, especially if you can't draw into that MST right away. So it is still a very powerful card, as indicated by the top 2 decks being Germ Burn, and Germ Burn winning the event and doing very, very well. So it's a very, very cool strategy. I'm glad to see it won, but I don't think all is over for Yata. Again, as I mentioned, I don't really think that necessarily people were prepared for this deck, and when you're not prepared for Burn, you can definitely fall to it. And I also think that like in an underexplored format like Yata format, you don't have the sort of level of competitive honing that you do. Again, it's like this sort of deck in a lot of other formats. Like if you look at GOAT format, right? GOAT format had a lot of people who prepared for pretty much every matchup under the sun. And so they will know how to play burn. The top players in GOAT format will be grinding against all sorts of decks, and they will know how to face off against a Panda Burn deck and win against that deck. And that's why Panda Burn is not necessarily the best deck in GOAT format, although you do see some exciting burn lists do pretty well in given events here and there. I'm thinking of like Pui's burn deck, the aggro burn deck that she showed off on her channel a while back. That seemed pretty cool, and you get occasional smatterings of that across the board. So, you know, these decks can do well if you bring an unexpected build or your opponent is a bit unexperienced, but it remains to be seen whether this deck actually is sort of just coasting off of surprise or if it actually is a sort of meta contender and maybe the best deck in the format. I don't think it will be the best deck in the format. I think it might be tier 1. Given these results, it definitely seems that way. But again, as I mentioned, more testing will be needed. More tournaments will be played. I'm very excited to see what the next event brings, because I wouldn't be surprised if people like tech against Burn, and Burn does not actually make it to the finals this time. But time will tell. We'll have to see exactly what happens here and what people bring and what people decide to bring in the side deck to actually stop this deck here, or maybe even main deck. Maybe they think it's a big enough threat or that enough people will be on it that they will main deck outs to it. I don't know. Yata format is such a volatile format. It's really hard to tell one way or another. Seems like every tournament is won by a different deck, and that's what makes it so fun, right? It feels like a format that's in flux right now, and I don't think that anything has solidified just yet. So if you're thinking about getting into a fun DM era format and you see that the event was won by Germburn, do not be scared off. You know, this is not necessarily a typical result, and only time will tell to see if this actually is going to be the result going forward, or if other decks will rise up and stop the Burn menace. Next up, we got the Warriors of Warrior Format 2, an event in Warrior format, what else, held on the Sogen format Discord server, which will be linked in the description down below. Again, this one had less players than the Yata tournament, 18 people total, and so it was a double elimination tournament, and it was won by, dun dun dun, Scientist FDK. That's a very, very scary sentence to hear, but Clody did indeed win with Scientist FDK, playing this 41-card Scientist FDK deck. You know, it definitely is a very cool thing that they've won, because they've been playing in a lot of these events over a long period of time, playing pretty eclectic builds and trying to make these sort of degenerate FTK decks work, and they actually managed to make it win this event, so that's very, very cool. And of course, I know that people are going to be looking at this and saying, oh my goodness, format's cooked, Science FTK the best deck in the format, there's no reason to play Warrior anymore if it can be won by Science FTK. But I do want people to sort of look at that with a bit of a grain of salt, because I do think while this deck can be strong enough to win games here and there, I think that overall, if we get bigger tournaments for Warrior format, it won't necessarily be in as commanding a position. Now, it's kind of an oxymoron, because if the format is like, you know, potentially bad enough to let Science FDK win a lot, then, you know, you're not going to get big tournaments for it. But I do think that Warrior format is actually a good format. It's just occasionally Science FDK is a deck that can, you know, lucky get to the finish line here. And I think that is kind of what happened here. I mean, if you look at the bracket, I think it is important to see here how many games Clody actually had to win. It was a non-negligible amount, I will say that. But if you look here, they did get a bye first round, or maybe not a bye, but they weren't one of these pairings here that had to play an extra match. They did wind up over here in pairing 5 against Vanilla. And so they won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games total. Now, they did sweep the top of the bracket, the winner's bracket, so you might be like, oh, well, that proves the deck is actually very strong. But actually, I think it is part of what makes this run so lucky. Not to say that they didn't have any skill involved, but I do think that when you're talking about a deck like Science FDK, which depends largely on luck, like you do need skill to execute the combo line once you actually have things in place. But I do think that outside of that, you know, it can be a bit of a rough ride. And also, I do want to mention that in one of these replays, I forget which one at the moment, but I did watch through them all just to see how this run went. One of the replays, someone definitely called the wrong level off reasoning, and I actually think that it might have changed the outcome in that game if they called the right outcome off reasoning. And I do think that when you get to that level, that could have been something that dropped Chloe down to the loser's bracket. And the reason why I mentioned that the winner's bracket up here was a bit less of a, you know, crazy feat than going down to the loser's bracket is because in a double elimination tournament, if you lose one game, you have to win a lot more games in the loser's bracket to actually dig your way out of the hole and make it back into contention. So I do think that, you know, just playing 5 games in the course of this, yes, it is still impressive that they managed to win, but I also think that, like, this is a small tournament against people who might not be as familiar with Science FTK and what to actually do against it. And those sort of combination of factors there did lead to a Science FTK win. Not to say that Science FTK can never win a game here or there. I think it is definitely a deck that you can bring, cheese a couple wins with it, and make your opponent kind of mad, right? But I do think that if you're thinking about bringing this to an actual major Warrior tournament in the future, and again, who knows if there will be major Warrior tournaments in the future, I think that Science FTK is actually a bad choice for you, because if you have to expect to play more than 5 matches of this, especially in a Swiss format tournament, where, you know, generally Swisses have 5 rounds, and then if you manage to win, or may not win, but get enough victories in Swiss to actually make it to the finals, you have to win multiple matches after that. It is a bit of a tall ask for this deck to do. And so I do think that this deck is not the best deck to bring to a major event if you do want to do it. But if you just want to have fun with it a bit and potentially win some games here or there, you can definitely do that. But again, big shout outs to Clody for actually winning with this deck list, because as I mentioned, while it does take luck, it also does take skill. You have to actually know how to execute the deck in order to actually win with it, even if you do have to also rely on getting some lucky hands here and there. But, you know, beyond that, I think the top cut was actually pretty good. And again, this is double elimination, so it's not like top cut as we know it. But if we look at like the top 3 or 4 decks, you can see that there's a variety of things here. Model was the second place list on Goat Control here, but playing a very interesting version of Goat Control. Actually, this isn't Goat Control at all. This is the Retrobot sort of mislabeling, I'd say. Because there's no metamorphosis in the deck, so you're not going into Goat from that. It's more of an aggro deck here. You've got Berserk Gorillas, you've got Spear Dragons, and stuff like that. So that is very, very cool to see. In addition, we've got Dumptruck on Panda Burn here. So this is a burn deck, which on paper might have a decent matchup against Science FTK until you realize that in order to actually set things up with Panda Burn, you kind of need your opponent to have monsters on field. And if they got monsters on field and they're playing Science FTK, they're probably got a Scientist and a Turtle on field, and they can probably do things to sort of play around your stuff here. So it might not be the best for you after all, playing Burn, or at least this style of Burn, into Science FTK. So that also is something that could have contributed to Cody's victory over this deck here. And then we got Reason Turbo in 4th place. Another deck that is very fun. I think this deck is a blast to play. I play it a lot. I have some major disagreements with this particular list, particularly the Vampire Lord. I think is not a good card here. 2 Crane is also kind of iffy in my opinion. But still, I think this deck is very, very fun to see. However, it is a deck like Science FTK that does need to get lucky off both its Reason calls and also its starting hands. And so if you're playing against a deck like Science FTK, that if they get lucky, they can win on first turn, where you can't quite do that, then I do think that it is sort of a disadvantageous matchup for you here. But you'll note that there aren't really too many people playing more like control-focused decks. A lot of this top cut was aggro here. And I think that is sort of something that, you know, is contained in the representation here. You had a lot of people on Warrior, a lot of people, 3 people on Goat Control, but one of those Goat Control things was an aggro list here. The other 2, I will say the other 2 look like they're Goat Control, so that is indeed Goat Control there. But, you know, beyond that, you don't really have too many control strategies. You have a lot of aggressive strategies here. And so that can make it a bit tricky to have the interruption that you need to stop Science FTK if Science FTK does go second. But I do think that given that people know that Science FTK managed to win an event, I don't think that they'll be caught with their pants down again here. I think that people will have more things in their side deck to deal with Science FTK. I think that they'll know the matchup a bit better. They won't call something that's not 5 off of a reasoning activation on the first turn. And I think that it will ultimately probably be unlikely that Science FTK will win another tournament, at least another tournament that is relatively sizable, right? Like, again, 18 people, not very many people here. Again, another reason to take these results with a grain of salt, or maybe not even a grain of salt, but just like a sort of idea that like this was a result that happened, but it's such a small number of players that variance does play a large factor in tournaments like this. But that's part of the fun of playing these old retro formats. Like, it feels like anything can win a lot of the time, because a lot of the time it can. Variance does play a major factor with that. And I mentioned this in my sort of tier list discussion video that I released a while back, that, you know, tier lists for these sorts of events are very hard to put together because, you know, honestly, if you got a small enough event like this, a deck can win just based off of some lucky games and a player who actually knows how to play it, and some good matchups against players who maybe don't know how to play against the deck that they're bringing. So, again, I think that it's much more unlikely that Scientific Decay wins in the future. So I do encourage people to try out Warrior format in the future. Again, you can check out all my videos on Warrior format if you want to see sort of more decks that you can play. And also you can check out me playing Scientific Decay and not doing very well because the deck it's kind of a brick fest, honestly. Maybe it's just a brick fest in my hands. I don't know. Check out the video for yourself and see if you agree or disagree with that sort of designation for it. But that's going to do it for this video. As always, if you enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. It really helps grow the community more, and maybe that will help us get tournaments with more than 18 players in it to see what wins then. Let me know what you think about these results down in the comments below. Do you think I'm just sort of like making excuses for these formats? Do you think they're cooked? Or do you think that, you know, this actually is correct and that maybe they aren't as bad as these results make them seem? Let me know down in the comments below, because this is definitely a topic with a lot of different viewpoints on it. And so I'd love to discuss with you all as always. As always, big shout outs to my patrons, Rinspin, Porkchopkin, Brad Knocker, Tyler Compton, GMYFS, Dump Truck, Scout Zero. It means a lot that you all support me this way and encourage me to make more videos like this one in the future. I hope that you all enjoyed as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off. Peace.